Hey there, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something that literally impacts almost all of us in the modern workforce, leading across borders and navigating these remote, hybrid, and global setups. If you've ever felt that friction of trying to align a team spread across three entirely different continents, or maybe you've felt the total exhaustion of an inbox that just never seems to sleep, well, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to look at the hidden costs of remote work, and way more importantly, figure out how to build a team culture that actually thrives under all this pressure.
So I want you to hold up a mirror to your own distributed teams for just a second. Ask yourself, honestly, is your remote team burning out? It's a completely serious question. Project management today is an incredibly high-pressure gig. We're constantly juggling competing demands, super tight deadlines, and wildly diverse teams scattered across multiple time zones. And while we spend so much time obsessing over timelines and deliverables, there's this massive, hidden friction happening in remote work. The reality is, mental health and team well-being usually stay completely off the radar until it's just, well, too late.
To put that into perspective, according to a 2021 Gallup study, 76% of employees experience burnout at some point in their careers. 76%. That is absolutely staggering, and it really establishes the core problem we've got to solve today. Because burnout, it isn't just a personal issue. It leads to higher turnover, more mistakes, and massive, expensive project delays. When we just ignore the mental health landscape of our teams, we're basically actively sabotaging our own long-term success.
So, here's our game plan for today. First, we'll tackle the remote leadership challenge. Then, we'll dive into bridging cultural differences, fostering meeting equity, and mastering asynchronous collaboration. And finally, we'll pull it all together by reaching the learning zone.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the Remote Leadership Challenge. Let's uncover that hidden friction in global teams.
Think about it. When you combine really tight deadlines with heavily siloed remote environments, you are essentially building a pressure cooker. You don't have that luxury of just glancing over at your team members at their desks to sense their stress levels. The friction is completely invisible. And we're seeing 4 major mental health challenges specifically hitting remote workers hard. First up is burnout, that prolonged stress that leads to total physical and emotional exhaustion. Second is isolation. When folks are working across totally different time zones, they struggle to engage in real time, which leaves them feeling super disconnected and left out. Third is the fear of failure. When you're isolated, every little mistake feels magnified, right? It creates this anxiety that absolutely kills innovation. And finally, people-pleasing. Because remote workers often fear disappointing leaders they rarely actually see face-to-face, they overcommit to totally unrealistic deadlines just to avoid disapproval. And where does that lead? Yep, straight back to burnout.
Moving on to Section 2, bridging cultural differences. Time to navigate those invisible borders.
A massive amount of this remote team friction actually comes from unaddressed cultural nuances. Cross-time zone collaboration is really just the logistical layer. The psychological layer is understanding that cultural differences deeply shape workplace expectations. So a one-size-fits-all management style, that fails completely on a global scale. On one hand, you have top-down hierarchy, which is heavily expected in cultures like Japan and India, where leadership is very directive. But then on the flip side, you have egalitarian leadership, which is heavily preferred in places like the Netherlands and Scandinavia, where decision-making is way more collaborative. If you try to force an egalitarian approach on a team member who expects top-down direction, they might actually feel like you lack leadership. But if you dictate top-down to an egalitarian team, they're going to feel totally micromanaged.
And we see that exact same clash when it comes to communication styles. Take direct communication, right? That's really valued in countries like Germany and the US, where feedback is super explicit and straight to the point. But compare that to indirect communication, which is much more common in places like China and Indonesia. There, confrontation is often avoided just to maintain team harmony. So what's the big takeaway here? Literally, the exact same piece of feedback can land as a super helpful tip to one employee and a deep, cutting insult to another, entirely because of their cultural context. You absolutely have to adapt your leadership style if you want to foster real inclusivity. That brings us to Section 3, fostering meeting equity. Let's talk about leveling the global playing field.
So when half your team is wide awake and chugging coffee, and the other half is fast asleep, how do you make sure everyone's voice is heard equally, without, forcing someone to take a Zoom call at 2 a.m.? Well, here are 3 highly practical steps leaders have to take to ensure fairness. Number 1, clarify your expectations for after-hours communication. Some cultures have a really strict boundary between work and life, while others feel this immense pressure to literally always be available. You have to be the one to set that boundary. Number 2, shift your focus from hours worked to measurable outcomes.
We desperately need to move away from this toxic culture of presenteeism, where putting in long hours somehow equals commitment, to a culture that values actual tangible output. And number 3, please stop defaulting to live meetings. I can't stress this enough, it is an absolute game changer for global teams.
Which perfectly tees up Section 4, Mastering Asynchronous Collaboration, working together on your own time.
Because real inclusivity, that means not requiring everyone to be on at the exact same moment. This is how you actually make meeting equity work in the real world. You don't need another live meeting. What you need are async tools. Use Slack for keeping communication channels open without the crushing pressure of needing to give instant live responses. Use tools like Notion or Asana to create completely transparent workflows and project management, so literally anyone can log on at whatever hour makes sense for them and see exactly where a project stands. And use Loom for video recording. Seriously, instead of trying to miraculously sync up calendars across 4 different time zones, just record a quick video update. Let your team watch it during their regular working hours. It fundamentally respects everyone's time zones and their diverse work preferences.
And finally, Section 5, Reaching the Learning Zone, Balancing Safety and Accountability.
Okay, we've talked about the big challenges, the cultural shifts, and the tools. But where are we actually trying to go? Well, to understand our ultimate destination, let's look at Harvard professor Amy Edmondson's psychological safety matrix. It's brilliant, really. It maps out exactly what happens when you mix psychological safety with performance expectations. Think of it like a grid. If you have low safety and low accountability, boom, you are in the apathy zone. People are just totally disconnected. Now, if you jump over to high safety but keep low accountability, you hit the comfort zone. Sure, it's friendly, but your progress completely stalls out. Now watch what happens when you demand high accountability, but you provide low safety. You land right smack in the anxiety zone. And this is the classic recipe for burnout. Tasks absolutely have to get done, but there is zero space for mistakes or vulnerability.
But our goal as leaders, that's the 4th quadrant, the learning zone. This is that magic spot where a psychologically safe environment meets high accountability. It's literally the only place where mistakes are viewed as actual learning opportunities, where feedback is seen as a tool for getting better rather than a source of shame, and where innovation truly just flourishes. Listen, true mental health and sky-high performance do not live in some low-stress, comfortable little vacuum. They live right here, together, in the learning zone, where your team feels completely safe to speak up, but they're also deeply challenged to grow.
And all of this pulls together into one incredibly powerful truth. Mental health is not a luxury but a necessity for sustainable success. It's that simple. You literally cannot squeeze world-class performance out of a burned-out, completely isolated global team. But by fostering open communication, prioritizing that psychological safety, respecting those deep cultural nuances we talked about, and leaning heavily on asynchronous tools, you can build teams that don't just survive under pressure, they thrive. So, I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. What is one step you can take today to foster a healthier work environment? Is it canceling that awful recurring live meeting and replacing it with a quick Loom video? Is it sitting down and just asking your team how they actually prefer to receive feedback? Don't put it off. Take that one step today and start building that resilient, engaged global team you know is possible. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer, and I will catch you next time.